Princess Vera had always been curious about humans. She had watched them from afar for years, through the vast networks of observation drones that spanned galaxies. From the very first time she saw them, she had been puzzled. They were fragile, small, and seemed ill-equipped to survive in the harsh conditions of the universe. Yet, somehow, they thrived. They built civilizations on planets that should have crushed them. They sailed oceans that could have drowned them. They faced diseases, disasters, and wars. And still they endured. Her curiosity began as mere academic interest. She was the heir of the Zelari Empire, a civilization that had explored countless star systems and studied countless species. But humans were different. They did not conform to patterns. Their behavior often defied logic. The Ray's advisors had explained that humans were biologically unique, that their species had remarkable adaptability. But when she asked the simplest question, how often humans could mate, her advisors had paused. They seemed uncomfortable, as though the answer was too strange to be contained in their data files. That hesitation intrigued her. If humans were so ordinary, why had her scientists faltered? Vera decided she would learn directly. She would observe humans herself, not through data feeds or simulations, but up close in their natural environment. The council had cautioned her, warning that humans were unpredictable, that they could be dangerous, that they were not like other species the Zelari had studied. But she ignored them. Curiosity, she realized, was more dangerous than any human weapon. Vera traveled to a small research vessel in orbit around Earth. The planet below was blue and green, covered in clouds and oceans that reflected the light of the nearby sun. She had seen many planets before, but Earth was alive in a way that her maps and reports had never captured. Cities glittered in the night. Forests swayed with unseen wind, and tiny lights flickered in remote villages. It was on this vibrant planet that she would study humans closely. She first observed them from the ship's viewing deck. Humans moved in groups, communicating with gestures, words, and expressions. They laughed, argued, celebrated, and mourned. Vera noticed that they often took risks for reasons she could not understand. A fisherman would stand on a cliff's edge in a storm to cast his net. Children would climb trees without thought of the fall. Lovers would face dangers together, as though their courage multiplied when they were together. The humans were fragile, yes, but their spirit was indomitable. Vera requested to observe more than behavior. She wanted to understand the biological and emotional aspects of human relationships. Her scientists hesitated again. They presented charts and graphs, but the numbers could not capture the human experience. The humans' bonds, their connections, were not simply chemical reactions or reproductive cycles. They were something deeper, something Vera could sense even from a distance. She decided to go further. She arranged for small interactions with humans under controlled conditions. Using holographic projections and communication devices, she posed simple questions about their lives. How do they survive disasters? How do they care for one another? How do they form families? The humans' answers were astonishing. They spoke of love and loyalty, of trust and sacrifice, of hopes and dreams. They did not measure their connections in cycles or efficiency. They measured them in moments, in courage, in the choices they made to stand by each other even when it was hard. Her interest deepened when she asked the question that had sparked her initial curiosity. How often can humans mate? The human response was not a number or a rigid schedule. They smiled, laughed, and spoke of desire, connection, and emotion. They did not follow rules. They adapted, they persisted, they created their own patterns. Vera realized that her scientists had been hesitant because no formula could capture the human spirit. They were not predictable. They were alive in ways the Zelari had never imagined. Days passed as she observed them. She saw humans in extreme conditions, explorers in frozen mountains, sailors in violent storms, villagers in deserts where water was scarce. They endured hunger, cold, heat, and injury. Yet, even in suffering, they maintained bonds with one another. They cared for the weak, celebrated the strong, and found joy in the simplest things. Vera began to understand that the human capacity for survival was intertwined with their capacity for connection. One could not exist without the other. One evening, Vera watched a small village on the edge of a forest. A young couple was repairing a roof damaged by a storm. The man struggled with the weight of the beams, and the woman laughed as she helped him adjust it. They joked, argued, and encouraged one another. When a child nearby fell and scraped his knee, they dropped everything to tend to him. Later, they gathered around a fire, singing songs. As the night grew cold, the humans were vulnerable, fragile, and easily hurt. But their resilience, their joy, their love made them formidable. Vera reflected on the contrast between her people and the humans. The Zalari valued precision, control, and efficiency. They had mastered technology and could manipulate the universe with logic and planning. But they lacked the human unpredictability, the human courage, the human will to act in defiance of the odds. A human could succeed where a Zalari would fail, not because of superior intellect or strength, but because of heart. She realized that her curiosity about human mating had opened the door to a much greater discovery. Humans were not just biologically different, they were fundamentally extraordinary. Their capacity for love, for connection, for survival against impossible odds was unmatched, and it was not a capacity that could be measured in charts, graphs, or cycles. It could only be witnessed. Vera decided to experience it herself. She would not interfere with humans, nor would she reveal herself. She would continue observing, learning, understanding. Every interaction, every act of courage, every moment of joy or sorrow added to her understanding, and with every passing day she felt something new: awe, respect, and a quiet admiration for a species that could survive, thrive, and love in ways the universe had not prepared it for. By the time the first part of her observation ended, Vera knew one thing with certainty. Humans were not simple. They were not weak. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and alive in a way that defied all expectation. The Zalari Empire had dismissed them as primitive, but she knew the truth. Humans were extraordinary. And she would continue to study them, not out of curiosity alone, but because the universe had shown her that humans could teach even the most advanced civilizations something about resilience, courage, and connection. Princess Vera spent more time observing humans, and each day brought new surprises. What she had seen from a distance in Part 1 now became vivid and alive. She began to follow small groups of humans in more challenging situations, studying not just how they lived, but how they responded to difficulties, dangers, and the unpredictable nature of their world. The more she watched, the more she realized that humans were not merely surviving, they were thriving in ways that seemed impossible. One morning, Vera focused her observation on a human expedition crossing a desert. The landscape was harsh, with scorching sun by day and freezing cold by night. She could see the humans struggling with thirst, fatigue, and uneven terrain. Most species she had studied would have given up long before reaching the halfway point. But the humans pressed on. They shared water carefully, encouraged each other with laughter, and rested in shifts so that the group could move safely even through the night. Vera's curiosity deepened. She had read about humans in her species' records. They were fragile, short-lived, and biologically limited. Yet here they were, adjusting to extremes with ingenuity. They had no advanced technology, no magic, and no perfect planning, but they made do with what they had. Each human seemed to carry a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. Even when a member of the group stumbled and fell, everyone rallied to help, without complaint or blame. As days passed, Vera observed the humans forming bonds that were more than survival tactics. Their relationships went beyond simple cooperation. She watched a young man sharing the last of his water with an elderly woman who could barely walk. She watched a mother protect her children from a sudden sandstorm, whispering words of courage and leading them through the harsh wind. She saw strangers comforting one another after minor injuries, sharing warmth, food, and laughter despite their exhaustion. The princess realized that the humans' ability to endure was tied not just to physical strength, but to emotional connection. They drew power from each other. Every smile, every gesture of kindness, every shared burden made them stronger. Vera compared this to her own people, who relied on systems and logic, but lacked the raw emotional drive that propelled humans forward. She began to understand why her advisors had hesitated when she first asked about human mating. Human strength was not measurable by cycles or numbers. It came from their ability to connect, to love, to care, and to choose courage over despair. Vera decided to observe humans in more extreme conditions. She turned her attention to a remote mountain village where winter storms often trapped the inhabitants for weeks. From her ship above, she watched as snow fell heavily, collapsing roofs and blocking paths. The villagers did not panic. They split tasks, clearing snow, reinforcing structures, and ensuring that no one went hungry or cold. When one of the villagers injured his leg, others carried him to safety without hesitation. They shared meals, clothing, and warmth, and despite the storm, they found moments to laugh and sing by firelight. The princess could not help but feel admiration. Even her most advanced Zalari explorers would have struggled in such conditions. Yet humans made it look natural. Their adaptability was breathtaking. They did not rely on technology alone. They relied on each other, on ingenuity, and on sheer will. Vera realized that this was a pattern she would continue to see wherever humans existed. They did not give up. They improvised, they protected one another, and they found joy, even in hardship. Then came an event that left Vera completely stunned. She turned her attention to a small human research team exploring the deep ocean. She expected caution, fear, or retreat, but instead she saw humans descend into the dangerous depths with courage and skill. They moved with precision, adjusting to pressure, temperature, and darkness. When one of their submersibles malfunctioned, the humans worked together, fixing the problem with tools and improvisation. They did not panic, they problem-solved. And when one of them became trapped, the others risked their own safety to free him. Byra watched, breathless.
The humans were fragile, yet they were fearless.
She began to understand that their reproductive capacity, their ability to form relationships, and their resilience were all connected. Humans bonded because it made them stronger. They endured because they had each other. They survived because they refused to be limited by fear or logic alone, and they did it all with laughter, hope, and determination. The humans' unpredictability was not weakness, it was strength. Vera became fascinated by the subtleties of human emotion. She observed a family living in a forest during a rainy season. The father chopped wood to keep the fire going, while the mother tended a small garden despite mud and flooding. The children helped where they could, laughing and teasing each other even as they worked hard. When the storm worsened, the family adapted. They reinforced their shelter, moved important belongings to higher ground, and ensured everyone was safe. At night, they gathered around the fire and told stories. The hardships of the day did not destroy them. Instead, they became stronger, closer, and more resilient. Vera realized that humans did not experience life in segments of survival alone. Every hardship was intertwined with connection, every risk accompanied by support. When she reflected on the question of human mating, she began to see it differently. Humans did not limit themselves to predictable cycles or rules. Their capacity for connection, emotional, physical, and social, was vast because it was intertwined with courage, creativity, and adaptability. It was not merely biology, it was life itself. The princess decided to observe humans in conflict next. She focused on a border region where humans faced hostile animals and environmental dangers. She expected chaos, perhaps even failure, but instead, she witnessed organization, strategy, and bravery. Humans defended themselves and each other, often putting themselves at risk to protect the weak or vulnerable. They devised clever traps and solutions that no Zilari mind could have anticipated. And when the danger passed, they celebrated together, comforting those who were frightened, bandaging wounds, and sharing stories of courage. Vera could not stop marveling. Humans were not perfect. They argued, made mistakes, and sometimes suffered. But they learned from their failures. They supported each other through mistakes and celebrated successes together. The princess realized that their resilience was not just physical, it was emotional, social, and moral. It was a complete kind of strength that no one factor could explain. One night, as she observed a human settlement from above, Vera saw something that solidified her admiration. A young couple worked together to repair a damaged bridge after a storm. They were exhausted, muddy, and cold, yet they moved with purpose and coordination. When they disagreed on the best method, they did not give up. They argued, discussed, and compromised. The bridge was finished, and they stood back, laughing and holding hands. Vela understood that this simple act embodied everything extraordinary about humans: cooperation, determination, creativity, and emotional depth. By the end of her second week of observation, Vela's perception of humans had changed entirely. They were not fragile, primitive, or limited. They were unpredictable, courageous, compassionate, and endlessly inventive. Their ability to connect, adapt, and persevere made them formidable in ways no Zilari calculations could capture. Vera felt awe, respect, and even a touch of fear. If her people underestimated humans before, they would soon realize the cost of such arrogance. Vera knew she had only begun to understand humans. There were so many facets she had yet to witness: how they faced disease, how they navigated social complexities, how they confronted loss, how they celebrated life. But she also understood something crucial. Humans did not survive by following rules. They survived by defying expectations, by creating connections, and by trusting in each other. And in that defiance, in that creativity, lay a strength that no Zilari empire had ever encountered. The princess resolved to continue her study, not from a distance, but through closer observation. She wanted to experience more of the human way of life, to see their resilience in action, and to understand their full capacity for connection. She wanted to see firsthand why humans could not be measured or predicted. In her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of a discovery that could change her understanding of life itself. Vera also felt a strange sense of excitement. She had come seeking simple answers about reproduction and biology, but what she found was something far more profound. Humans were extraordinary, and the universe had not prepared her people to face the truth of their strength. The young princess, once curious and cautious, now felt inspired. She realized that to truly understand humans, she must continue observing them in all aspects of life. Each day promised a new lesson, a new marvel, a new revelation about the species that had captivated her more than any other. And so, Vera's fascination grew. She watched, learned, and admired, knowing that the humans' true power was not in weapons or technology, but in their hearts, their minds, and their unyielding will to survive and connect. It was a strength that no empire could ignore, and she was beginning to see why humans had earned a place in the cosmos not just as a species, but as a force to be reckoned with. Princess Vera had now spent weeks observing humans. Every day revealed something new, something astonishing. Their courage, their adaptability, and their connections with one another were far beyond what she had imagined. She had seen them endure storms, deserts, freezing mountains, and crushing oceans. She had watched them repair bridges, comfort the wounded, and share resources in ways no calculation could predict. But now, she wanted to see how humans reacted when the stakes were truly life or death. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. On a distant research expedition, a human colony faced an unexpected crisis. A massive solar storm had erupted from the sun, sending waves of radiation toward the planet. Sensors showed that communication systems were failing, navigation devices were glitching, and large regions of the colony were without power. From her ship above, Vera could see the chaos unfold. Humans ran through the streets, some confused, some frightened. Others immediately began organizing efforts to protect their families and neighbors. Vera's eyes widened as she watched the humans respond. Unlike other species she had studied, they did not freeze in fear. They did not wait for orders from a leader or for perfect plans to be drawn. Instead, they acted immediately, using whatever resources were at hand. Engineers repaired circuits with spare wires. Farmers carried water and food to those in need. Children helped elders move to safer shelters. The humans were improvising, collaborating, and thinking creatively, all at once. The princess realized that this was unlike anything she had ever seen. Her people, the Zalari, were advanced and disciplined, but they followed protocol and calculation. When faced with sudden catastrophe, they could falter if the plan failed. Humans, however, thrived on unpredictability. They made mistakes, yes, but they adapted faster than any calculation could predict. They turned chaos into action, fear into determination, and disaster into opportunity. One human stood out in particular. A young woman named Alara led a group of children to a reinforced shelter. She kept them calm with stories and games, even as the wind howled and the sky glowed with the strange light of the solar storm. When one of the children fell and hurt his leg, she did not panic. She carried him, using blankets to keep him warm, and instructed the others to follow her carefully. Her leadership was not formal or imposed. It was earned through courage, empathy, and decisiveness. This was what made humans extraordinary. They rose to challenges not because they were told to, but because they chose to. Meanwhile, in another sector of the colony, a team of engineers faced a critical problem. The storm had disabled the power grid, and without it, the water supply would fail. The engineers examined the broken circuits and pipes working together under the flickering light of emergency lamps. Each had a different skill, and they combined them in ways that created solutions beyond what any of them could have imagined alone. One rigged a makeshift generator, another designed a temporary pump system, and a third coordinated the distribution of water to the people most in need. Vera's sensors showed the flow of cooperation, and she marveled at the humans' ingenuity. The crisis intensified when a fire broke out in one of the residential zones. Flames spread quickly, driven by strong winds. Normally, a fire of this size would have caused panic, injury, or worse. But humans reacted with speed and coordination. Neighbors formed chains, passing buckets of water, covering small fires before they spread further. A group of teenagers created a barrier with sand and blankets, stopping the fire from reaching homes. Others rescued animals trapped in the blaze. Even as the flames roared, humans laughed, shouted encouragement, and refused to give up. Princess Vera began to feel something unfamiliar: admiration, awe, and a hint of fear. Humans were small, fragile, and seemingly limited, yet they acted as if they were limitless. They did not wait for perfection. They made do. They adapted, and they survived. Each human acted not for reward, not for status, but because it was necessary, because they cared for each other, and because they would not allow fear to control them. Vera's attention shifted to a small family trapped on a hilltop. A landslide caused by the storm blocked the path down. The father, mother, and their 2 children were surrounded by rising water. Vera expected hesitation, panic, or despair. Instead, she saw the father craft a makeshift bridge from fallen logs. The mother guided the children carefully across it, stepping cautiously and holding their hands. When a log shifted, they did not scream or give up. They adjusted, recalculated, and continued. Even the children contributed, finding stable footing and helping each other. By the time the storm subsided, the family had safely crossed to solid ground, unharmed. The more Vera observed, the more she realized that human strength came from something deeper than biology. It was not just muscles, or speed, or stamina. It was willpower, creativity, empathy, and courage combined. Humans could face any obstacle because they did not face it alone. They relied on each other, but also on their own resourcefulness. Even in exhaustion or fear, They found solutions, made decisions, and kept going.
Veira also noticed how humans celebrated small victories.
After each danger was averted, they shared laughter, hugged, and expressed relief together. A human's joy was not loud or flashy. It was genuine, grounded, and contagious. Their ability to recover emotionally, to continue despite hardships, was as important as their physical endurance. Humans were resilient not only in body, but in mind and spirit. In another part of the colony, a group of humans trapped in a collapsed tunnel worked together to free themselves. The debris was heavy and unstable. Veira expected panic or injury, yet the humans coordinated carefully, lifting stones together, using levers and tools to move obstacles. When one of them became fatigued, others rotated to give relief. They communicated constantly, encouraging each other, correcting mistakes, and applauding small successes. Finally, after hours of effort, they emerged into the sunlight, exhausted but triumphant. Princess Veira's admiration deepened. She had always assumed that intelligence and technology were the ultimate measures of a species. Humans were intelligent, yes, but their intelligence was paired with emotional awareness, adaptability, and determination. They learned from mistakes quickly, they shared knowledge freely, and most importantly, they acted out of care for others, not just self-preservation. The solar storm finally subsided, leaving the colony battered but intact. Fires were extinguished, water systems restored, and families reunited. Humans moved among the ruins, salvaging, repairing, and comforting one another. Veira noted that they were exhausted, yet already planning improvements to prevent future disasters. They did not despair. They did not complain endlessly. They acted. They adapted. They survived. And in doing so, they strengthened their bonds, their community, and their resilience. Veira reflected on her observations. The human's capacity to endure crisis, to act creatively under pressure, and to care deeply for one another was something no Zalari formula could capture. They were unpredictable, yes, but their unpredictability was a form of power. They could succeed where others would fail, not because of perfect planning, but because of ingenuity, courage, and connection. She also realized something else. Humans were not afraid of complexity or risk. While many species avoided challenges, humans confronted them directly, learning, adapting, and improving as they went. They made mistakes, but mistakes did not stop them. They were opportunities to grow. And in this growth, they became stronger, faster, smarter, and more capable. Princess Veira's fascination with humans now bordered on reverence. She had begun her observations seeking simple answers about biology and reproduction. Instead, she had discovered something far more profound. Humans were extraordinary. Their strength lay not in technology, not in numbers, but in their hearts, minds, and willpower. They were resilient, adaptable, and united by bonds deeper than she had imagined. As she watched the colony rebuild, Veira realized that humans were more than survivors. They were creators, innovators, and heroes in the truest sense. Even in the face of overwhelming danger, they acted with courage, compassion, and determination. They did not wait for rescue. They did not depend solely on tools or weapons. They relied on one another and on their own ingenuity. And in doing so, they transcended limitations that might have crushed any other species. By the end of the third week, Veira felt something profound, a mixture of admiration, awe, and humility. Humans were small and fragile, yet they carried the strength of 1,000 species within them. They were fearless when necessary, clever when challenged, and compassionate at all times. They had taught her that survival was not about power alone. It was about connection, courage, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. Veira's studies would continue, but one truth had become clear. Humans were not ordinary. They were not predictable. They were not weak, and any civilization that underestimated them did so at its own peril. And deep within the princess, a quiet realization grew. Humans were not just fascinating to study. They were a force of life, resilience, and courage, unlike any other she had ever encountered. Princess Vera had now spent a month observing humans closely. Each day had revealed new layers of strength, ingenuity, and courage that no data or report could capture. She had seen them endure storms, deserts, mountains, and oceans. She had watched them improvise solutions to impossible problems, protect one another in the face of danger, and create joy even in hardship. Yet she knew there was still more to understand. Humans were extraordinary, but could they survive a test that truly challenged their limits? The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A massive asteroid, larger than any the humans had ever encountered, was detected hurtling toward their planet. Scientists on Earth estimated that if it struck, it could devastate entire regions, destroying cities, forests, and oceans. From orbit, Vera watched as the news spread. Humans around the world reacted in countless ways. Panic, fear, determination, and relentless action all at once. What fascinated Vera most was that despite the fear, humans did not surrender. Communities began to organize themselves immediately. Governments coordinated evacuation plans, engineers worked tirelessly to develop solutions, and ordinary citizens volunteered wherever they could. She watched as a small town near the coast began moving people, livestock, and supplies to higher ground. Neighbors helped neighbors. Families worked together, and even strangers stepped in to lend a hand. Vera realized that the human's ability to unite under pressure was unlike anything she had ever seen. In a research facility, a group of scientists worked around the clock. Their goal was to deflect or destroy the asteroid before it could impact. Vera observed them closely, noting how they communicated, collaborated, and improvised. Some had expertise in physics, others in engineering, some in robotics or energy systems. None of them had worked on a project of this scale before, but they did not hesitate. Each idea was tested quickly, mistakes corrected immediately, and new solutions were invented on the fly. Even when experiments failed, their morale remained high. They encouraged each other, debated respectfully, and celebrated small victories. Vera found herself drawn to one young engineer named Kale. He was exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, but he continued working tirelessly. He adjusted calculations, checked equipment, and coordinated teams with energy that seemed boundless. When a prototype failed spectacularly, Kale did not curse, panic, or give up. Instead, he laughed briefly, then examined the problem, adapted the design, and tried again. His resilience impressed Vera more than any technology she had seen. This was the essence of humanity. They failed, learned, and tried again, always moving forward. Across the planet, ordinary humans also faced challenges. Farmers reinforced their barns and homes, ensuring that their livestock and families were safe. Teachers helped children understand what was happening, calming their fears and keeping them occupied. Volunteers cleared roads, moved supplies, and checked on the elderly. Even in the midst of potential disaster, humans found ways to care for each other, to remain compassionate, and to act with courage. Vera began to understand a profound truth. Humans were not simply enduring challenges. They were thriving in the face of them. The asteroid represented the ultimate test of their resilience, ingenuity, and cooperation, and humans were meeting it with extraordinary determination. Their ability to combine intelligence with empathy, courage with creativity, and willpower with teamwork created a force that no threat could easily defeat. As the asteroid approached, the human scientists implemented their plan. Rockets and lasers, satellites and energy beams, all were used in an attempt to alter the asteroid's course. The humans worked around the clock, facing exhaustion, frustration, and uncertainty. Vera watched as Kale and his team adapted to unexpected failures. One satellite malfunctioned, yet they rerouted power from another, reprogrammed a system, and continued the operation without delay. Vera marveled at their ingenuity. Where any other species might have panicked or waited for instructions, humans improvised, collaborated, and kept moving forward. Meanwhile, civilians carried out evacuation plans with precision. Families moved to safer areas, communities set up shelters, and volunteers ensured that nobody was left behind. Even in fear, humans maintained empathy, kindness, and courage. Vera realized that this combination, their intelligence, adaptability, and emotional strength, was what made humans not just survivors, but heroes, in the truest sense. As the asteroid entered the planet's atmosphere, the tension reached its peak. Vera held her breath, watching the humans execute their final maneuvers. Lasers fired, rockets adjusted trajectories, and massive energy fields were projected. The asteroid wobbled, threatened to break through, but the humans adapted instantly. When one approach failed, they recalculated, adjusted, and tried another. Their persistence was relentless. They did not give up, even when failure seemed imminent. Then, in a moment that left Vera speechless, the humans succeeded. The asteroid's trajectory shifted, and it passed safely by the planet, burning up in the atmosphere with no casualties. Cheers erupted across the planet. Families embraced. Scientists hugged each other, and strangers celebrated together in the streets. Humans laughed, cried, and sang as relief washed over them. They had faced what seemed like certain destruction and emerged victorious, not through strength alone, but through unity, ingenuity, and courage. Vera felt something she had never experienced before, a profound admiration that bordered on awe. Humans were small and fragile, yet they had achieved what no one would have thought possible. Their strength was not in brute force or advanced technology alone. It was in their hearts, their minds, and their connections with one another. The princess realized that humans' unpredictability was their greatest weapon. No calculations, no protocols, no limits could fully capture their ingenuity and resilience. She reflected on the journey she had observed. From the deserts and mountains to storms and collapsed tunnels, humans had proven over and over that they were extraordinary. They survived because they cared for each other. They succeeded because they adapted and persevered. They thrived because they refused to be limited by fear or expectation. Every act of courage, every moment of cooperation, and every choice to act rather than despair revealed their true power. Vera could no longer doubt the humans' greatness. She reported her observations to the Zalari Council, her voice steady but filled with emotion.
Humans are not what we expected, she said. They are fragile, yes, but in spirit, in courage, and in heart they are unmatched.
They survive not through force alone, but through connection, creativity, and determination. Any civilization that underestimates them does so at its peril. Her words sparked debate among the council. Some Zalari were skeptical, unable to comprehend how a small, seemingly fragile species could overcome such challenges. Others were intrigued, seeing the humans' potential as allies, or perhaps as a force to respect and fear. Vera, however, knew the truth. Humans were extraordinary, not because they followed rules or calculations, but because they created their own paths, faced danger without surrender, and lifted each other up when it mattered most. In the days that followed, Vera continued her observation, though the asteroid crisis had passed. She watched humans rebuild their homes, care for the injured, and comfort the grieving. She saw communities grow stronger, bonds deepen, and spirits remain unbroken. Even when faced with minor setbacks, humans responded with determination and ingenuity. They did not despair. They acted. They persevered. They thrived. Vera's admiration grew into something more profound: respect, awe, and a sense of humility. Humans were not perfect, but their imperfections were part of their strength. Their mistakes taught them lessons. Their risks revealed courage. Their challenges inspired creativity. Every human action, small or large, reflected the extraordinary potential of their species. The princess understood, finally, why her advisors had hesitated when she first asked about human mating. Humans were not limited by cycles or rules. Their lives, their connections, and their strength were limitless in ways no formula could capture. They were alive in body, mind, and spirit, capable of creating, surviving, and thriving against any odds. They were extraordinary not because they were invincible, but because they refused to be defeated. Princess Vera returned to her palace in orbit, her mind filled with admiration and wonder. She had traveled the galaxy, observed countless species, and studied civilizations advanced beyond imagining. Yet humans had left a mark on her unlike any other. They had taught her that true strength came not from technology, power, or control, but from courage, connection, adaptability, and compassion. They were unpredictable, yet unstoppable. They were fragile, yet extraordinary. As she looked down at Earth, Vera smiled quietly. Humans had survived the asteroid, faced impossible challenges, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united. She knew that they would continue to astonish the universe, not because of what they had, but because of who they were. The human story was far from over, and she could only imagine the incredible feats they would achieve next. Vera realized one final truth. Humans were not just a species. They were a force of resilience, ingenuity, and the universe, vast and mysterious as it was, had never seen anything quite like them. With that, the princess made a decision. She would continue to observe, learn, and perhaps, one day, interact with these remarkable beings. But one thing was certain: humans had earned her awe, her respect, and her admiration. They had proven themselves in ways no other species had, and in doing so, they had earned a place not only in the galaxy, but in her understanding of what it truly meant to be extraordinary. Humans were unstoppable. Humans were incredible. And Princess Vera knew she would never forget them.